like to present to you now Dr. Larry Hedges.
Thank you, David. More than 100 years has passed since Bertha Pappenheim invented psychoanalysis. It was she who coined the phrase, the talking cure. Bertha was a patient of Dr. Joseph Breuer's, as most of you know. Her analysis lasted 18 months with Freud, when she was later transferred in over 100 years ago, in 1881 and 1882. I always like to tell a story about Bertha because she was a social worker. She later became a celebrated personage. My favorite story is during the Nazi regime. She was running a home for wayward youth, for juvenile delinquents. And at one point, the Gestapo come in with their big black boots and they come banging in and they have this little kid by the ears, you know, and it's, do you know what he's been doing? All over the fences he's writing, "Fuck the Fuhrer." So she was a tiny little woman, a Jewish lady, and she put her hands on her hips and she told him to get out, that this was a home for disturbed children and they would see that it didn't happen again, and they left. She was recently commemorated on a postage stamp. She was what's been called the specimen case of psychoanalysis. The case in the literature is known as Anna O. When she started, by anybody's standards, we would think her pretty much a basket case. We could use all of our borderline symptoms. You know, there were eating problems, and there were addiction problems, and there was this, that, and the other. So we'd see her as sort of, what, a mixed bag? Borderline, moderate to severe? What would we say? What would the politics of our field want us to do? So Bertha began with Dr. Joseph Breuer, and for long periods of time, he was required to come and see her every day. And then when she'd moved to the country, to her country home in the summers, he'd have to take long train rides out to see her. At times during her analysis, she wouldn't even eat. So he was literally feeding her chicken soup with a spoon. Any of you ever done that? Because she wouldn't eat otherwise. She began first talking about her treatment with Dr. Breuer as waiting all day long until the end of the day when the doctor would come and penetrate her fleecy clouds with his wisdom, with his words. It was like, she said after he left, the chimney sweep had been there. Now, we would miss the sexual metaphors today, and I don't think Dr. Breuer did, nor would we miss today, as I don't think he did, that the onset of Bertha's difficulties were at the point that she began to nurse her father in a terminal illness. And that was the point at which she presented herself for work. The work went on for quite a while, but it became more and more difficult for Dr. Breuer. I know all of you have ideal model people that come to your practices, so you don't have any late phone calls or anything. Well, in those days, of course, there weren't telephones, but there were messengers, and the messengers were ready to run with another message. So at all hours of the day and night, there would be a message come from Bertha's home, and the good doctor would be summoned, and it was getting worse and worse and worse, and he was getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And but what was worse, the relationship began to interfere with his new marriage. Now, I know none of you have ever had marital difficulties over your work. I know that those midnight phone calls are not a problem for your spouses. Well, these messengers, it got worse and worse, and Mrs. Breuer, who was really a new bride, was quite jealous and overcome, and he decided it was time to end this case. Now, I'm sure you've had that happen to you, where it's time to end the case. So he quick-like, through suggestion and command and demand, managed to kind of get Bertha patched together and terminated the case. Well, on the day of termination, needless to say, in the Breuer household, there was going to be a festival like we have today, celebrating something really important. He's rid of that awful Bertha. Okay. There's a special dinner on the table. The candles are lit. You know, they're getting ready for an evening of all of the things that we do with our very significant others after the lights are out. And there's a knock at the door, a messenger from Bertha's family saying all of her symptoms have resurged. It's an emergency. The doctor must come at once. The dinner's put in the oven. Candles are snuffed out for a while. The good doctor puts on his overcoat and goes out into the cold to see Bertha. When he arrives, she goes through, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and doctor, there's something new. Yes, what is it? I'm pregnant, and the baby is yours. This is the beginning of countertransference. You know, in trying to pull together my thoughts for today, I mean, the last few days it's been really interesting because I felt like I wanted to say everything that was important, and I didn't know if in the time allotted I was going to be able to do it. But I think the main thing, and David has already hinted at it in the introduction, the main thing that I'm interested in conveying today is that it's my belief that our entire field, everything we've thought, has to be reconceptualized. Nothing lost, nothing put away, but I believe we're on the threshold of an entirely new way of considering our work, and if I had to use one word for new think, it would be relatedness. That the true discovery of Freud was that by listening to the case between Bertha and Dr. Breuer, he listened to the way each one of them experienced the other at this sort of point that Breuer was ready to terminate the case because of the pregnancy. Freud agreed to take the case on, and in the passing of the case, Freud heard all of the details about the countertransference, the doctor, his marriage, his fears, the responses to the sexual seductions. He also had a chance to hear all of the representations that Bertha put out. And from the way in which self and other were represented, first by Bertha and then by Joseph Breuer, Freud said he first understood the power of the unconscious. That it was in this case that the Freud's notion of the unconscious, the doctrine as we know it today, occurred. That insight from the first insight in the first case, I think really marks where we're still going. To grasp that when people come into our lives, whether it's in our consulting room, our personal lives, maybe it's our children, when people come into our lives, we have an extraordinary experience in store for us. And we're fortunate in doing the kind of work that we do, and you all know that. You know that so many people live very difficult lives all day long, working in jobs that they hate, and most of us have that mastered. You know, the hours of our day belong to us, and we're doing very exciting things with people. As someone comes into our life, into our consulting room, we're going to be listening and watching for the way in which they orient and relate to us. And now we're at the point where we're also watching the way in which we orient and listen to ourselves, so that we can talk about the mythical beasts of psychoanalysis, whether we're going for ids, egos, instincts, and most of you are aware I've been classically trained, so I have no disrespect for the theoretical structures that mark our history. But it's like in the movement of all thought systems, we start with several, and then we add other concepts, and then at some point there is a breakthrough, and I'm going to be presenting to you what I think is the major breakthrough, and it's not anything that is original with me. I would like to define for you what is happening. Make explicit for you where I think our thinking is today and the plane of abstraction that I think we're needing to move to. So I've already hinted at one, that we're going to be, in our work henceforth, I think, not so concerned with